Today we're going to discuss about Yemen war and the crisis in Middle East concerning the issue of Yemen. And today we have two respected guests with us. We have Ms. Janice Kortkamp from USA and also Mr. Dr. Kerim from England. We are definitely honored to have both of you on this program. And I would like to start with the first question from Dr. Kerim. As you know, it's been nearly many years that we're witnessing this war concerning Yemen, and there has been so many victims and so many problems concerning this issue in the Middle East. I would like to know about the reason why this war took so long and we're still dealing with such a crisis in the Middle East.
There's a very simple answer to that question, actually. And the answer is just pure greed. Greed and hunger for power. That is the reason why the war in Yemen is still going on. It is now 4 years that this war has been going on. And hopefully, you know, it can come to an end fairly soon. Now, to go a little bit on the history of this war. This war was commenced citing United Nations Resolution 2216, which gives power to the Saudis and its coalition to attack a sovereign country, and that is Yemen. Now, for anybody who knows 2216, 2216 was a resolution which was passed for only 4 people in the country of Yemen. One of them being the late ex-president of Yemen, Ali Abdullah Saleh. And so the best way to attack Yemen was to piggyback on Resolution 2216 and make it a blanket for the whole country. Now, Resolution 2216 also has a clause in it that puts a blockade on the entire country, so no food can come in and no food can go out. And you know, and on the other side, on the flip side of the coin, the arms sales and the arms race became so big, and so multi-billion-dollar deals were done. Saudi Arabia was buying arms from any whichever country would sell arms to them, and in turn, they were asking those countries to be part of a coalition. Now, at the peak of this war, there were 32 countries attacking one sovereign country. 32 countries. That was the coalition. Slowly, this is actually weaned down to just a few now. But when you look at the history of it, Yemenis are fighters of Arabia. This is the oldest civilization in Arabia. You're not going to go inside their country and you're not going to take their country from them. They're not going to allow it. And so, you know, in order to, and then when you look at the third facet of it, you have the port of Bab al-Mandab. Now, there's a huge problem here because the Strait of Hormuz belongs to Iran. That is where all Saudi oil is passing through from. And Bab al-Mandab is the only other way that they can get their oil through without depending on Iran. And that becomes very crucial for them to have a puppet government in Yemen, which will allow them to do that and allow them to build pipelines. So this war is not coming to an end. They're not winning, but they keep at it because now it is about saving face. And the countries that were in coalition are starting to pull out slowly, and it's becoming a complete shambles. So that is the little history on that war.
Thank you so very much. You mentioned a very important point about uh, about this issue. You actually said that there has been a coalition behind this whole conflict, and I would like to go ahead to our other guest, Ms. Kortkamp. Um, so far, this coalition and Saudi Arabia and at its head tried to actually achieve some goals in Yemen. But I would like to know if Saudi Arabia uh, achieved anything or not, or if they have achieved anything. What were them?
I could not agree with Dr. Kerim anymore. I think he gave a perfect, succinct summary of this entire conflict. So thank you for that wonderful answer to that first question. And going back to his answer, I think we have to look at different goals. One is Saudi Arabia has always coveted Yemen. Yemen is a beautiful, spectacular country. Although it's poor, it's quite an astounding place with amazing people, and as he said, very strong and very dedicated to their land. But Saudi Arabia has always been seeking to control it, for quite a long time. So they do not. That is one goal that has not been achieved. The other goals regarding greed and lust for power, of course, those are things that are never satisfied. And so one of the things that we're seeing as Dr. Kerim mentioned with the arms deals, this has actually become a huge factor where, people say now wars are created to sell weapons, and I think this is a perfect example of that mentality. It has achieved a goal of punishing the Yemeni people, of starving them, of creating a terrible punishing situation for the people there with disease and fear, terror, killing the children, bombing civilians. It has been a total humanitarian catastrophe. And if that was one of their goals, they have achieved that to great extent. And I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if that wasn't one of the goals, because we saw that happen in Syria as well. So, if the goals are just to reinstate Hadi, and get their puppet back in power there, they haven't achieved that. And they haven't achieved, full control over the strait, as Dr. Kerim said as well. So, it's a mixed bag at this point. I would say the goals have not been anything positive, obviously, and that they have succeeded in creating a truly horrific nightmare in Yemen.
Ms. Kortkamp actually perfectly explained about the goals that Saudi Arabia and the coalition tried to achieve. And but there is a question in here. After all of this bloodshed and after all of these war crimes, how can Saudi Arabia just get out of all of this without any kind of punishment or without any kind of sanction by international community? Mr. Kerim, what is your idea about this thing?
There's quite a few facets to your question, so let's start from first. Okay, number one, Saudi Arabia is not a signatory to the International Criminal Court, so nobody can do anything to them. Okay. Number two, they sit on the Human Rights Commission in the United Nations. Number three, they're one of the largest funders, along with the United States and United Kingdom and France and all these countries that are in the coalition. They are the largest funders of the United Nations. If anything was to be done, United Nations would have done it by now. But the problem is that you need a backbone to do that. And the third thing, and the fifth thing is that actually these are the two countries that could stop the war within the hour if they wanted to. The United Kingdom is a pen holder to Resolution 2216. they could make an amendment and present it to the United Nations Security Council's extraordinary meeting, and this war would effectively stop. The second part is that if the United States was to stop fueling Saudi warplanes mid-air, this war would effectively stop as well, immediately, because these are the two things that would stop this war. But the problem is that none of them want to do that because there is huge profits to be made. And where there's profits, human life is immaterial. It is all taken as collateral damage. And plus, you also have the Shia-Sunni divide when it comes to Saudi Arabia, because they will support all the Sunni population, and they will not support the Shia population, and that is one of the reasons why north of Yemen, Sana'a and Hodeidah and all these places are under constant bombardment. Is that and on the other hand, you can actually see that there is food being distributed down south in Aden and all those areas, which are Hadi controlled, which are ISIS controlled, which are Al Qaeda controlled. There is, so Yemen has become an absolute and a complete mess right now. And the reason why there is no punishments for this or sanctions for them is that the arms sales are just way too big to let go, and that is the reason why this war is going on for the last 4 years. And until this avenue is not exhausted, I don't think this war is coming to an end anytime soon, unless something drastic happens and all the parties sit down in good faith. And that is another problem right there, is that there is no good faith. When you send a low-level delegation to go negotiate peace, and then every time the other party sneezes, you have to report back home and say, this guy sneezed, now what kind of medicine we should give him. There is never going to be peace. So it has to be in good faith and in a very controlled environment where they have to come to agreement, and without that they're not leaving the room. That's probably gonna work. But as far as I know, these are the problems that people, all these countries are getting away with without getting punished or without getting sanctioned.
Next question, which is basically about the situation of Yemen on the ground. And as you know, Ms. Kortkamp, we have this both narrative in different mainstream medias that some say that, for example, Saudi Arabia is just getting all the power in this war, and everything is just in favor of this coalition. And some say actually that, on the other hand, for example, Houthis are somehow getting all the victories, and everything is just in favor of Houthis in this war. I would like to know your own opinion about this situation of this war right now.
Well, it's very difficult to ascertain, I believe, because you have differing statements from differing parties. I think it's any particular day there may be an advantage on one side or the other. I do believe that it's at a precarious time right now because Washington is really gearing up for a major something against Iran, and the rhetoric has been building and building, and so they're going to maximize anything they can to build their case for, if not a full-out war against Iran, but for further punishment, sanctions, actions, etc. So everything is going to, there's going to be a lot of propaganda and false news and fake narratives surrounding everything right now. And everything is actually kind of, and been for a long time, working towards something that Dr. Kerim mentioned, and that is an overall strategy of wanting to pit Sunni against Shia. And this is to the advantage of many of these global powers that are involved, the U.S. and its allies, in order to continue the profits of all of these weapons sales, to continue to create chaos in the region and give them opportunities for taking advantage of whatever situations come up and increase military presence and occupations, bases, etc. So, it's not just a conflict in Yemen. You have to look at it from the context of what's happening in the region. As far as what Yemen has accomplished is really quite extraordinary, and this I put down to the stamina and the ability of the people of Yemen to withstand this constant onslaught and the deprivation and the suffering. But they have limited resources. There is a blockade on their country. It's not like, Iran can supply them with a tremendous number of weapons and the medical assistance they need and the food and all of these things. So it becomes a test of wills, in my opinion. You have Saudi Arabia, whose motivations are all wrong, in my opinion, and you have the Yemenis fighting against them, whose motivations are to defend their country and to defend their independence. So all that being said, I think it's too early to tell, to answer the question.
Actually, I would like to go into other aspect of this situation, which is Iran. Dr. Kerim, you know that Iran was somehow involved in this chaos, but not directly for sure. And I would like to know about the role of Iran in this whole issue of Yemen, and if Iran has done whatever it should have done morally or internationally or in humanitarian aspects toward Yemen or not.
Well, of course it should have. Of course it should have. And I personally think that Iran's role, although it has not been that big in this war, the powers that be have tried to pin this whole Houthi power onto Iran, and until today, the propaganda machines are churning out information that, Iran led, Iran supplied, Iran supported Houthi militia. Whenever you hear that, there is always Iran supported Houthi militia up in there. And they say this is Iran fighting a proxy war with Saudi Arabia. This is according to their propaganda machine. But this is untrue. To date, they have not been able to substantiate that with even a single piece of evidence that says that Iran is actually involved in the war in Yemen. They have been, they have supported the Yemenis, but in a very, very limited capacity, and also in supplying humanitarian needs, in supplying food and medicines, and there's cargo planes that have gone there. There's ships that were docked there forever, and they wouldn't let the Iranian goods enter into Yemen. But Iran did abide by the resolution that we're not going to force ourselves into doing this, but it is our moral duty to make sure that these children are not dying. So that is Iran's role. That is as far as I know from inside of Yemen. But when you look at how the mainstream media and the propaganda machine churns it, they have literally made this a war of Iran against Saudi Arabia, a war of Sunni against Shia. And they're capitalizing on it on an everyday basis when that is not the case. It is absolutely not the case, and it shouldn't be termed as that. This is a sovereign country that was attacked. They had nothing to do with this war, and they're paying the price for the last 4 years. 26, 27 million people are now basically, at the end of their rope. And for what? Because somebody wants to sell arms and somebody wants to sell their oil. Let me tell you something about Yemen is no community has been spared. War has decimated entire families. They have left behind agony, terrible memories filled with fire, fearful screams, and smell of burning flesh. War cannot be measured by the structural damages it causes. War burns into the heart of these people long after it is ended. And Yemenis, though, they have risen time and again from the pyres lit by Saudi Arabia. This is not the first time. And with grace and generosity, they have pulled together to resist together. And I think, we owe such bravery to be told to the world. But unfortunately, we can't do that because the mainstream media is completely blind. And, that makes it even worse. So in as far as Iran's role is concerned, it is very, very limited. And if anybody tells me otherwise, I would not believe it for a second.
All right. Thank you so very much, Dr. Kerim. I would like to go back to Ms. Kortkamp. As you are a perfect activist and you have a huge and vast experience concerning Syrian conflict and the chaos of Syria in recent years, and you have done so many lovely activities in order to show the truth about the crisis in Syria. I'm interested about this question because of your experience in this issue, and I would like to know about the duty of activists and human rights groups and NGOs toward the Yemen war that it is still going on, chaos in the region. What is your suggestion about any kind of activity toward this war?
Well, it's a great question, and I would like to start with a short story, actually. I was up in New Jersey and going into New York for a meeting with a group of Yemenis, actually, Yemeni Americans, as well as a gentleman who had come in from Yemen recently, and I was asking him a lot of questions. They had come to go to the UN to try to plead on their behalf and tell the people at the UN what was really going on there. And this was actually, I think, 2 years ago that I met with them. And they said every single door of the UN was closed to them. And save for, like the Syrian representative and the Iranian representative, every other door was completely closed and did not want to hear what they had to say. And I agree that the human consequences of this are not just catastrophic for this generation, but, are going to be damaging for generations to come. So it's imperative for activists, and there are many, many thousands of activists around the world who are trying whatever we can possibly think of to get the truth out to normal, everyday people who are so, I can only speak for Americans, but in general, they are completely ignorant of what the U.S. is about in the Middle East and our allies are about in the Middle East. They couldn't pick Yemen out on a map. They have no understanding or idea of it whatsoever. So our primary task is to educate. And that just requires a lot of time and patience because there are many people here who are very good-willed, and once they understand the truth, they become activists in their own right. But it can often take a great deal of time to educate a single person, and this is the frustration we're having, but almost a negative lack of understanding where people have been programmed to think in the wrong direction and not ask questions for themselves. So the only thing I can think of is for people to continue to push through, continue to share the truth and the stories that we're getting from people in Yemen and reports in alternate media and around the world. But also we have to think really creatively, and we have to be very active in not just, for example, posting on our own Facebook pages. That's a classic mistake. You have to be daily out on the media websites, the media the mainstream media, social media sites, talking in political discussion groups for various political candidates, for example. We have one political candidate, I'm not endorsing her, I'm just saying Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii is really advocating against these wars, and so that's an opportunity for engaging people in conversation. But for us who don't have any access to the mainstream media, literally it's almost one person at a time, and this is why it has taken so very long to get this message out.
Thank you. I would like also to ask next question from you again, Ms. Kortkamp, and then I will go back to Mr. Kerim. So eventually, how do you see the future of this whole conflict?
Sometimes I wish I could see it, and sometimes I'm thankful I can't see what's going to happen in the future. But there is an interesting dynamic that is just starting to come into play, and that is the Washington administration. You know, all of our administrations have been warmongering, but the truly almost unbelievable amount of warmongering rhetoric from John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, for example, and the fact that Donald Trump is not particularly popular with a lot of people here. Now we are starting to see a little bit of pushback and questioning of these policies and acts of aggression. And so I think there is a general sense forming that, people in America are against these wars. Those of us who know obviously are, but there's also a general sense, even amongst the general public that are not that informed, they don't want to be involved in these wars. And I think there's a momentum forming, is what I'm trying to say, for more rationality in our policy. On the other side, you have the whole system in Washington, and everything's determined by Washington. Honestly, Saudi Arabia could not do any of this without the full blessing and cooperation of Washington. And as your other guest said, if all they would have to do is say no, and it would end. So everything centers around Washington now, and the momentum of the swamp, as we call it, our system, is for more war and continued acts of creating chaos and continuing these wars indefinitely. So we're going to see over the next, between now and the election, if we can get some momentum going to stop these endless conflicts. Until that happens, or until Saudi Arabia runs out of money to spend on weapons and decides they're bleeding and hemorrhaging too much money against Yemen, these kinds of things, we're going to see it continue, I'm afraid.
I think Janice put it very aptly, that this is where the problem lies. We're seeing some kind of action coming from the United Nations, and we're seeing some kind of action. They're trying to not broker peace, but try to get a ceasefire in Al Hodeida, where the war is just ravaged lives completely. But other than that, until the powers that be are satisfied that we have milked enough money out of this war. This war I do not see ending. I can, they may be discussions, they may be different starts about, about let's do this, let's do that, let's have a meeting. But when you get results, that is a different thing altogether. And I don't see any results until and unless the the media does actually start providing real information on the ground as to what is happening. And like Janice said, and to be able to do that, all the activists are going to have to work really, really, really hard to get this in front of the people. Let's not kid ourselves. You have people like Senator Tulsi Gabbard. You have Ted Leo from Seattle. These people are against this war, and they have gone out time and again on a limb to end this war in Yemen. And I applaud them for all they can do, but they just do not have enough support to get anything done. And that is because we're too deep into it. If these countries that tout themselves as the pillars of democracy in the world and human rights, if these countries, any of these countries actually were that, what happened to Jamal Khashoggi would have stopped everything, because that is a blatant violation of human rights. But they did not, unfortunately, even after agreeing that this was not done correctly, and the people responsible for it were rogue elements, and they've already been punished. And these are all stories coming out of there. There's absolutely no substantiation to it. But what I'm trying to say is that in the end, it was like, we are not going to cut our ties with Saudi Arabia, because when you're making enough money, why would you want to upset the apple cart? And so because of that, this war will keep on going for a while until somebody gives in and says enough is enough. There's too many people dead. There's too many people dying. And we need to stop this carnage.
Right. I'm truly thankful to both of you. We have actually come to the end of this episode of The Fact. And it was a great and highly informative talk with both of you, Ms. Kortkamp and also Mr. Kerim. And you gave your precious time. And we hope that we can have you again on the program next times and in the next episode. Also, for our viewers and followers, you can actually check our YouTube channel in order to follow our other videos. And we hope we can have you and also see you again on the program. Thank you so very much, and goodbye.